Although filling is there, it is not broken, it is not fracture, but it is not performing its function. So we call it failure. And the opposite term is success, success of a material. What is success of a material? If material is intact, it is not broken, there is no caries, aesthetically and functionally it is perfect, it looks fine, it works fine, patient has no complaint, which means patient's comfort and satisfaction, and we call it success. So what is the purpose of this lecture? We are aiming to understand the process of failure, and we need to understand why a material fail and how we can prevent them. What are the main failures of any material in the oral cavity? Failure can come from anything we do during a restoration. Like failure can be due to operative procedures, failure might be due to material itself. For example, if you see this schematic presentation, failure can come from the tooth structure itself. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the material, but tooth itself. So what can be wrong? Tooth can break, or it can get a fracture, or caries or pulpal pain. So this can happen with the tooth structure or even wear. So the purpose of this slide is to show you the failure is not necessarily from the material. It can happen from tooth itself. And it can also happen from the, of course, from the restoration or restorative material also, like it can fracture, it can have wear and creep, improper handling, stress concentrations, inadequate retention, so material can fall out, material can break, so anything can happen with material as well. And also bond between the tooth and restoration, which we studied in the adhesion chapter. So due to bad adhesion, there can be contamination, cyclic fatigue, secondary caries, marginal leakage. So they can also lead to failure of material. So once we come across failure, we should understand that it can be from tooth structure, it can be from restoration itself, or it can be from bonding or adhesion between material and tooth itself. So what is the importance? The importance is we should treat the related issue. Like if it is from the tooth or it is from the filling, we can manage or we can treat the cause. Right. So let's move another prospect. Anything can fail due to various reasons. So I have grouped into three categories. The first one is mechanically damaged. So what is mechanically damaged? Anything related to force. We all know any material in the oral cavity is under the stresses of mastication. So they are subject to kind of masticatory stresses or other stresses, so force is applied. So mechanically material can fail due to masticatory forces, streaks failure, cracks, creep, and habits, like certain patient might have nail biting, pen biting, so that can lead to extra mechanical stresses and failure. And also chemical damage. Chemical damage include corrosion, which we will go through in detail, food chemistry, what kind of food we are taking. It can react chemically with the restoration. It can react chemically or has chemical effect on teeth. Acid dissolution. We have minerals in the enamel and dentine, so it can be solved by acid attack. And where this acid is coming from, maybe from drinks, citrus fruits, gastric acid coming from the stomach. In addition, there may be physical damages as well, either to the tooth or to the respiration. So what are physical damages related to? Temperature changes. As you can understand from temperature changes, we eat or drink hot subjects, we eat or drink cold, so temperature fluctuates. Saliva itself containing moisture, various microorganisms, galvanic action. We will read about this galvanic action. What is this? Plaque, brushing itself, and defective restorations. Defective restorations will result in corrosion. So we will discuss all these points which are related to failure in this lecture. We must keep in mind any material or any restoration works in the oral cavity, and oral cavity is a complex environment. So what we mean by complex environment? Because in the oral cavity, every person is different. Every person's food is different. Every person's oral environment is different. For example, some people like more chocolates, some people like more citrus fruits and abrasive foods like crisps or this kind of stuff. So every person's oral cavity is different and it is complex. We cannot make things standard. Okay, this is a standard and every person's oral cavity will be the same. This is not possible. Dynamic. So dynamic means it keeps changing. The oral cavity doesn't remain same every day. It keeps changing. Every day it has a different microorganisms, different temperature, and it keeps changing, not even daily basis, even every hour. In the night, it has different environment. In the morning, it has different environment in terms of pH, microorganisms, and various things. Occlusal forces coming from force of mastication. And then we have gingival fluid and saliva. We all know we have various components in saliva like electrolytes, mucus, enzymes. So they might affect on the restoration. They might solubilize certain restorative materials. Solubilize mean they can dissolve them, they can wash out, they can disintegrate, might change color, and also change in pH a lot. Because if someone is eating sugary food, is likely to drop pH. So pH will be acidic. So the purpose of this slide is we keep all these factors in mind. That oral cavity is complex and it keeps changing. It is not stable. General causes of failure include inherent factors such as type of stress is number one, because during mastication, a lot of stresses comes on the tooth and restoration itself. Temperature fluctuation, as I mentioned, various people take different temperature food, hot and cold. pH cycling, depending on sugary food, oral environment, pH might change. Of course, acidic pH is more dangerous in that terms. Humidity, this is not a dry environment. They work in a humid, watery environment. So the life of restoration or any material is affected by humidity also. Microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi present in the oral cavity, and then stagnation areas. We have certain stagnation areas like pits and fissures where more accumulation of plaque and more bacteria. There are induced factors, wrong selection of material. For example, we know that high masticatory stresses to come, but we use a weak material. So this is a wrong selection. We know the weak material might not work on this place. Incorrect design of the restoration or preparation, imperfect manipulation of the restoration. So this means we are not using these materials correctly, or we are not performing the procedures correctly. So there is nothing wrong with material, but their handling can also compromise the restoration life, and it may lead to failure ultimately. So the possible failure, the most common failure or the reason why material fails in the oral cavity, the number one is tarnish and corrosion. And we have wear, fatigue, craze, and fracture itself. We will discuss all these points in detail, like how this happen and why this happen and affect on the uh, success of. Yes, tarnish and corrosion. What is tarnish and corrosion? First of all, let me explain to you a couple of points related to corrosion and tarnish. The tarnish is initial stage and corrosion is advanced stage. And this property is only specific to metals. We will not see this tarnish and corrosion in other materials. The tarnish and corrosion is only in case of metals. And in layperson language, we call this as rusting. So rusting is corrosion. So let me define tarnish is surface discoloration of metals or loss of surface finish. So this is called simply tarnish. So if you see here the example, this is normal metal and this is change of color. So the change of color means the tarnish process has started and it is going to lead in corrosion very soon. Another example, and then tarnish, change of color. However, in corrosion, the actual disintegration of a metal and alloy. If you see the example of corrosion of amalgam, the margin is broken or corroded. We call it corroded due to nature of amalgam. Similarly, this normal everyday iron, which has been corroded, and in normal day language, we say rusted. So this is corrosion. Also, we can see corrosion here, which is damage of the metallic material. So the tarnish in the oral cavity occurs from hard and soft deposits. For example, calculus, which is a hard deposit, and plaque is a soft deposit. So these deposits can change the oral environment and they create some kind of electric circuit or electric potential. So this electric potential can cause, they give energy to cause corrosion. So this is the first step in the corrosion. I will explain this in further detail. Okay. So there are certain factors that should be considered in case of corrosion. For example, the condition of metallic material and the composition. If there is a difference in composition, we are likely to get more corrosion. There is one point to mention, that is electric potential or electric current. If there is a formation of electric current, there will be more corrosion because current will flow and that current will release various ions, metallic ions, which will lead to formation of corrosion. Similarly, temperature changes, if there are temperature changes or fluctuation, that will also affect on the metallic surface. Nature and solubility of corrosive products or corrosion products. The corrosion products, for example, iron oxide, iron sulfide, if they are soluble, they will be washed out and next layer of metal will get corroded. If they are not soluble, the corrosion product will remain there, the corrosive layer will remain there, and further corrosion will stop. So that is why if it is soluble, it will lead to more corrosion. So the corrosion can be classified into two main groups, the dry corrosion or chemical corrosion, and aqueous or wet corrosion. As you can see from the name, the dry corrosion will happen only in dry environment when there is no water, no moisture, while the aqueous corrosion will take place in the presence of water or moisture. So we are mostly concerned about this because in the oral cavity, we have aqueous environment. We don't have dry environment. So this can be further divided into stress cell, galvanic cell, concentration, and heterogeneous composition corrosion. So these are the causes and also groups of aqueous corrosion. We are going a little bit deep in the corrosion, and I will try to explain various aspects. In dry corrosion, there is simple oxidation or sulfurization. So this happens in dry environment and is only related to our materials before use. For example, if we have amalgam, not in a bottle, it might oxidize. The silver component get corrosion product. But once we apply in the oral cavity, we face aqueous corrosion, where there is metal electrolytes are formed and there's formation of electric cell and resulting in corrosion. So only point to mention here is the dry corrosion is only relevant in clinics before application in the oral cavity. For example, storage. During storage, material can oxidize to get some corrosion. So this is an example of electric cell formation. If you see, there are two dissimilar metals. One is aluminum crown and one is gold crown. So due to difference in electric potential, this oral fluid will act as electrolyte. So the charge will flow from one metal to the other metal. So this can result in formation of electric cell, and sometimes it result in sharp pain because patient will feel like electric shock. The same mechanism works on galvanic cell corrosion or galvanic pain. Even when teeth are not in contact, the difference in electromotive force between the two fillings or two metals will result in such kind of corrosion. I hope you understand this point. So this is, I just show the example of an electric cell. In electric cell, the current flows from negative or low potential, negative to positive electrode to form an electrode cell. This electrolyte is saliva in our case of oral cavity. So the electrolyte is provided in the oral cavity, and this flow of current or electric potential will lead to corrosion. And also the same mechanism act for the galvanism or galvanic corrosion, which is due to metallic respirations. So we get galvanism because the electric potential of every metal is different. So one metal has low potential and the other metal will have high potential. So from the current will flow from one potential to the other potential to cause corrosion. Even if we are using the same metal, the composition may be different to some extent, thereby causing the corrosion. The heterogeneous surface corrosion, because the metal surfaces are different. Even if we use the same metal, there is little bit difference in their composition. For example, some of the metallic ions may wash out and changing the composition and the potential. So this difference in electric potential will result in formation of galvanic cell or electric cell and flow of charge, resulting in corrosion. So this is basically another mechanism of corrosion. And we need to keep in mind the composition of our metal or alloys. Similarly, impurities are also acting to enhance the corrosion, because impurities are, if you remember my previous lecture about grains and grain boundaries. So the impurities are gathered in grain boundaries. So these are the areas of electric flow. Because in the grain boundaries, we have impurities, all impurities gathered there, and the electrode potential different from that of the actual metal grains. So this means the current can flow within the same metal from the grain boundary area to the actual grain. So this flow of current due to heterogeneous composition will result in corrosion. Similarly, in a single cell solution, we can also have various compositions, like inner core is different metal, outer core is different metal. So the current can flow from one composition to the other composition, even within the same alloy, because every metal component will have different electric potential and it will lead to flow of current. Similarly, solder joints, where we join two metals together with the help of solder, we face the corrosion, because we are joining two dissimilar metals, and it will form an electric cell, and current will flow from high potential towards low potential, and this flow of current will cause corrosion. It should make it clear. The stress cell corrosion, as indicated by the name, if we create some stresses in the metallic component, it will result in corrosion due to stresses. For example, if we are cold working, we are bending an alloy, there is formation of a metal structure.
Doctor,
Yes.
can you repeat this slide, please?
Okay. Just 1 minute, let other students join as well, and then I will explain this again.
Okay.
Right. So this is cold working. Okay. Is everyone with us? Okay. The stress cell corrosion, as name indicates, it is due to the stress. If we make some stress in the metal structure, for example, if we bend a wire, so the angle made in the wire, it will have localized stress in that part, and that part is more prone for corrosion, because in the bending there are stresses on the metallic crystal, and one area will act as a metal anode and other will act as a cathode. So current will flow from cathode to anode in the presence of saliva. So due to formation of this electric potential, there will be corrosion. So we should avoid excessive burnishing or excessive bending of metallic structures. This is burnishing, which we do for amalgam restoration. And wire bending, you can understand, if we bend a wire, it make an angle. But this is burnishing, another example. So we should avoid excessive this one, because the stresses we create in the metal structure will result in more corrosion. I can give you examples in the clinical scenario. If you see this denture clasps, due to cyclic loading and unloading, we get stress concentration in these areas because they are bent, they get deflected, and they are exposed to fatigue while we remove it and insert it. So therefore, these clasp areas are more prone to corrosion and ultimately fracture as well due to fatigue. So this is an example of stress corrosion. Another example is atoms at the grain boundaries. If you remember previous lecture, I explained you about grains and grain boundaries. So there is difference in electrode potential due to different composition or arrangement of cells. So the one area can act as a cathode and one area can act as a anode. So an electric current can flow. And this can also be exaggerated with localized stresses when we try to bend in cold working. So these stresses in the grain boundary area will be increased. So they will increase more stresses and electric potential leading to corrosion. So from here we can assess that we should not create more stresses in the metal structure if we are using cold working or burnishing. It will create more stresses, and more stresses will lead or likely to have more corrosion. But of course we cannot avoid stresses in certain cases. For example, this denture, how we can avoid stresses. Patient has to insert and take it out. So only what we can do is use a material that is corrosive resistant. I will explain in next slides how we can avoid corrosion or reduce corrosion. Of course, we cannot avoid, but we can reduce corrosion. But there is one more type of corrosion, which is concentration cell corrosion. So in this type of corrosion, we have in the same area, we develop different electric potentials, or we have same material, same metal, but we have different areas of potential. So due to difference in potential, the electric current will flow. For example, interproximal area, where there is different type of electrolyte because saliva cannot flow inside. Similarly, in case of plaque accumulation, the part of metal that is under plaque will have different potential, and part of restoration that is free from plaque will have different electric potential. So this difference in electric potential will lead to more corrosion. Another example we can see is, for example, any surface scratches, any irregularities such as pits. So in such pits or scratches, in the depth of scratch, there is less oxygen or less potential of oxygen, while compared to the margins. On the margins, which are rich in oxygen, and they lead to change in electric potential. So if you see, for all types of corrosions, it is working on change in electric potential. So due to any reason, if there is change in electric potential, it will result in formation of current flow or formation of electric cell that will lead to corrosion. So the conclusive point from this slide is, if surface is rough, for example, or if there are various scratches or pits, so they can act as an area of difference in potential, electric potential. So this difference in electric potential can result in corrosion. So therefore, we should use polished surface. If surface is not polished or there are scratches on the surface, it may lead to corrosion. Okay. So how we can protect corrosion? Actually, we can only reduce corrosion. We cannot completely protect corrosion, because anything that will be working in the oral cavity, saliva is an electrolyte, aqueous environment, we have harsh environment. So we cannot eliminate corrosion, but we can only reduce it with certain measures. Like using homogeneity, we try to use as similar material possible. So there is no heterogeneity to cause corrosion. And we have oral environment that can be modified to neutral, because in acidic we are likely to get more corrosion. Similarly, certain metals, for example, gold, platinum, and palladium, these are called noble metals. We will teach you in next term. So they are less likely to react with oxygen and less corrosive. So it is recommended to add these metals to reduce the corrosion. But of course, these are expensive metals, but can be added. Protective coating, we can add protective coating, for example, coating a polymer material on metals, but practically it doesn't work. And it can be scratched out because they are not as hard as metals. So the scratching again will expose metal surface and the corrosion will be accelerated. We can also use passivation method. In the passivation method, metal itself form a layer of oxide layer, such as chromium oxide in case of stainless steel. So this formation of chromium oxide is very corrosive, very corrosion resistant. So they prevent corrosion. So in case of passivation, we have a metal oxide or ceramic layer on the surface of metal, which will protect further corrosion. So all the stainless steel stuff is protected with this method. Similarly, titanium also forms titanium oxide, which is also passivated and not corroded. That is why the titanium implant we use, they have passivated layer of titanium oxide and protected. Good oral hygiene. So there is no plaque accumulation. If there is plaque accumulation, it will change the electric potential in various areas, because in rough areas, it will have more potential. Avoid dissimilar metals. So try to use similar metals so there is no difference in electric potential, and there is no, also it is very difficult. It is because every metal has a different potential series. The surface must be polished, because if this is rough surface, there will be more scratches, and more scratches will result in formation of electric cell and leading to corrosion. Minimize number of soldering joints. Although we are not using soldering very frequently, but if we use soldering, it should be kept in mind that it can cause corrosion due to difference in electric potential of soldering alloy and the parent alloy. So the next one is wear. So wear is a time-dependent property, which is loss of surface or loss of surface material, either in case of natural teeth or restoration itself. Because we all know that when these materials are in service, they are exposed to friction when we use it for masticatory stresses, for chewing, and for this kind of activities. And so this can result in loss of material. Wear can produce biologically active particles and can result in inflammation. Because once wear is there, these particles can be ingested or harmful, or it may affect the oral tissues. So inflammatory response can be found there. Also, once wear is there, because loss of surface, the surface will change. We will find like wear facets, we will change of shape, loss of original anatomy. So these are because material will not fail or fracture, but still it will change its shape and the morphology of tooth or restoration. We discussed this before, like if we had two materials, the hard material will wear the soft material. Similarly, porcelain or ceramic is the hardest material, even harder than enamel. So it will wear opposing enamel or dentine. Similarly, acid isolation, if we are getting acid in the oral cavity, it will result in wear of teeth. And wear also result in change of shape and cosmetically is not good. So we can categorize that as a failure because the material is not, or the restoration is not functionally stable. The acids we are concerned about is coming from citrus fruits such as lemon juice or gastric fluid or gastric acid, vinegar, orange juice, this kind of stuff which are acidic, they can solubilize hydroxyapatite or enamel tissue and resulting in wear of tooth structures. So if you see a lot of wear here of natural teeth, this is wear of natural teeth, and this is chemical wear or erosion due to acid attack. This is mechanical wear or abrasion due to brushing, aggressive brushing. And this is bruxism, tooth wear. The bruxism means patient grind their teeth forcefully, maybe at night or maybe when they are younger. So this is called bruxism. The causes of wears are physiological, which is attrition. I'm sure you must have read about it. This is normal attrition, which can happen with time. Because once we masticate, we chew our food, the teeth strike with each other, and that striking can result in some wear. Bruxism, some patients who have grinding habit may cause in wear or attrition. It will be attrition, but due to bruxism. Chemical causes also called erosion. Acidic drinks, reflux esophagitis, a patient which get stomach acid into their oral cavity, they can find this kind of wear. Mechanical causes typically seen here in case of aggressive tooth brushing or cutting some tools with the teeth. So that can have mechanical or abrasive cavities. Although we get help from saliva because saliva acts as a lubricant. So it reduces the wear between surfaces, but still we have, with the passage of time, we observe the wear of various tooth structure and restorations. Including these four types: abrasive wears, which I explain in case of brushing, fatigue wear with usage, corrosive wear, we already discussed in detail what is corrosion, and adhesive wear. So the wear is explained by two surfaces which are grinding on each other. So when we grind two surfaces, this is called two-body abrasion. For example, attrition. If we click our teeth together, we grind our teeth together, this will be two-body abrasion and it will lead to attrition. The normal physiological attrition is not much. It may be like in microns. In one abrasion, we have three materials. We have third material here, such as food particle or even toothpaste that act as a. This means when we rub two surfaces. For example, we rub our upper teeth and lower teeth together. So this will result in abrasive wear. So abrasive wear can be two-body abrasion, which is shown here on the left side, or it could be three-body abrasion, which is shown on this side. So in two-body abrasion, we have two surfaces like our upper teeth and lower teeth. They grind against each other, resulting in attrition. While in three-body abrasion, we have some slurry or some food acting as a third material. So that is why we will have three materials: upper teeth, lower teeth, and food. Or we can have upper teeth, toothpaste, and toothbrush. So there will be involvement of three different materials. The fatigue wear is due to cyclic loading or cyclic stresses. because during the mastication, we get 300,000 loadings per year. So this is a huge number of loadings, and that can result in the formation of micro cracks. If you can see here, this micro crack, either it will join other micro cracks to make a long crack, or it will extend on its own to make a long crack. So this long crack, after thousands of loading, will fracture. So this will result in form of chipping, like chipping of enamel, chipping of porcelain. So this we call fatigue wear. If you see this picture, the black lines are shown micro cracks, and then they join each other to make a bigger crack. And finally, they cause fracture of this fragment. So this fragment will chip out. So in case of fatigue wear, we find usually a small piece chipped out. Similarly, it is shown here schematically, force applied. We apply multiple forces. So first it affect on the surface, and then it start making a crack inside, and that crack continue to increase and increase. And it might lead to fracture of chip out of small part, or it might cause fracture of the material itself, which means the material can break also. Corrosive wear, we discussed that in detail. The corrosive material is not having good mechanical properties, so wear results in removal of corrosive layer, or even anti-corrosive or corrosive resistant layer, and result in wear of the material. As I explained earlier, the corrosive only happens in metals and alloys. So this is secondary to physical removal of protective layer. For example, if we have used polymer layer or passivative layer, so that can be removed as a result of wear, and then corrosion will start. And then it will continue with the wear of corrosive layer. The adhesive layer, adhesive wear is as indicated by name. So there will be joining of two surfaces together. And when we apply further stresses, the softer surface will wear off. If you see here in this picture, two surfaces are joined together, so there is adhesion. And when we slide these two surfaces, the weaker surface will wear off. The weaker surface will break, and the stronger surface will not break. So this will lead to applying compressive stresses. So there is formation of weak adhesion as a result of compressive stresses. And when we slide, or there is friction between two surfaces, the softer surface will wear off. So this can result in torn off surfaces from the original surface. Right. As we see corrosion in metals and alloys mainly, similarly we have crazing. That happens in polymers only. So the crazing appears cracks on the surface of the resin. So they might be micro cracks which are not visible, or they may be visible. So what happens in crazing? Due to tensile stresses, there is separation in polymer chains. So we will teach you in detail about cross-linked resins and non-cross-linked. But for now, just understand the cross-linked is a link between two chains. If two chains are linked, this is called cross-linked. So if cross-linked resins, there will be less crazing, but otherwise more crazing. So crazing may result from, number one, mechanical stresses, because they are repeated load of stresses or freak stresses, which will result in alternative contraction and expansion. So the cyclic loading result in separation of polymer chains. So this separation in polymer chains will result in a micro crack between polymer chains, which we call crazing. Similarly, solvent action, if we apply monomer, because monomer can solubilize certain part of polymer chain, so it will result in crazing. Due to difference in thermal coefficient, because in the oral cavity we get thermal changes. If the thermal coefficient is different of two materials, there will be crazing between both materials. This is shown the example of crazing around porcelain teeth, because thermal coefficient of porcelain is different and the denture base is different. So we can see crazing here. I'm sorry for the bad image, but this line we can see crazing. So it is not a fracture, but we can see the crack line or separation line between them. Cleansing the denture by bleaching agent or alcohol. Again, these are organic solvents which can dissolve certain polymer components, and they can result in separation of polymer chains and cracks are visible. Also, water passes from gypsum to acrylic resin during curing. So this can also result in crazing, because water molecule might cause separation between polymer chains. So this is why we apply a separating media. Therefore, the water cannot pass from gypsum to acrylic resin. But failure to apply separating media result in passing water, and this water molecule can act as a separating medium or separating molecule between the polymer chains, which are seen as a crazing. Okay, the finally is the fracture. Fracture, as we all know, the separation of surface to create a new surface. So separation or fracture can happen with certain high impact load or cyclic fatigue. It can break the material. So mostly people consider that failure is only fracture, but only fracture is not the failure. But material can fail due to all these reasons which I described, like corrosion, wear, crazing. So these all can contribute. The causes of fracture are mainly the mechanical. The mechanical loading, for example, tensile stresses or masticatory stresses, cycling, cyclic stresses, like, which means the surface will keep getting, is kind of fatigue wear, because micro cracks keep developing, and one day it will fracture. We might have impact strength. A denture fell down by a patient, so get an high impact stress on the denture and resulting in fracture. Stress corrosion cracking, as I explained in case of denture clasps, so it can happen. So prevention of a fracture: decrease the stress concentration by decreasing the chance of fracture as occur in case. So we need to strengthen the material by reducing the stress concentration areas, like any sharp bends, any area for corrosion, any thinning of the material, so that can develop stress concentration, that should be avoided. So these are examples of fracture. This looks to me typically high impact, or the denture might fall down and it break. And this is the fracture of amalgam respiration due to cyclic fatigue, because this material might serve for maybe 10 years, 15 years. So keep getting cyclic stresses for years and cracks built, and finally they cause fracture of respiration. Thank you very much. I know this this is an interesting topic, but like involved too much chemistry and physics. So I try to explain in clinical context, and I hope you understand most of it, inshallah. Any questions?
Thank you, Doctor.
Any questions, please?
Doctor,
Yes.
can you repeat the slide number 22?
Slide 22, okay. Slide 22. Okay, what is your question on slide 22? Okay,
I don't
the wear.
understand. Yes.
Okay, wear, right? Okay, so wear is loss of constituents from the surface. So this one, right? So what is wear? Wear is a time-dependent property. When any material serve in the oral cavity, it gets friction from the masticatory forces. So due to this friction, the material surface is lost due to friction, due to rubbing. So this loss of surface is called wear. For example, you put a 5 millimeter long crown, okay, but after grinding for 5 years, it will remain 4 millimeter. So we have 1 millimeter wear. Okay, so wear is usually undesirable. We don't want material to wear because wear products, firstly, it will change the shape of a restoration and it will damage it. Also, the worn particles like wear particles, they might be dangerous if digested, or they might cause inflammatory response. So this is why we don't want, or we want very little wear. But sometime if it is very hard and very wear resistant, we cannot finish and polish. So there is a balance. So it is not wearable in the oral cavity, but it is not that hard we cannot finish and polish. Is it clear?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, any other question? So the finally conclusion is we cannot completely avoid the failure, but we can take certain measures to reduce number of failures, or we can do measures to delay the failures. We can reduce the corrosion, we can reduce the wear, and for anything we should know why this failure is happening so we can treat that. If failure is happening due to excessive corrosion, we can treat that. If it is due to excessive wear, we have a different treatment. So the purpose of this lecture was to give you a basic idea, like failure can happen, so we should not worry about the failure, but we should work on to reduce the failure and prolong the service life, which we call longevity of the restoration. So longer the restoration will serve, it will be more beneficial. So I hope everything is clear. If you read this lecture, inshallah, it will get more clear, inshallah. Any other question?
Thank you, Doctor. It's all clear.
Okay, thank you very much.